What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and I'm here today with Dan Cox. So Dan, for those who don't know, won the MPG Breakthrough Engineer of the Year, and he's also worked with so many incredible artists, including Florence the Machine, Leanne Le Havas, Flume, and Neo, just to name a few. So hello, Dan.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, very glad to have you here, and thanks for meeting us this morning. And we met last night actually for the first time.
Yes, by complete chance.
Yeah, so we ended up being at the same event at BBC Introducing Live in London, and I saw Dan across the room. I'm like, I've been stalking him a little bit before this episode. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Dan, and gave him some weird looks, but luckily he didn't get too freaked out and then actually had a chat with me afterwards. So so that was lovely. And you pulled up all right this morning.
I pulled up all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No mishaps on the way in. It was all right.
Lovely. So today we are talking about microphones. So you've got some great information to share with us.
I have some knowledge, apparently.
Yeah. Some good knowledge, which we will get into. But before we do that, I would love to hear about your journey into music production and what got you excited about it, and how did you end up in this gorgeous studio, by the way, in Urchin Studios, which is Dan's studio. And yeah, so tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I kind of got into production, I guess. Like the starting point was the same starting point for, I think, probably almost every producer or engineer. I was playing an instrument. I played guitar. I had a band, and I just kind of started to get curious about how do you record this stuff? You know, maybe we should. So I bought a little 4-track. Started playing around with that. Got myself a mic, which was also even better.
Yeah,
for using with the 4-track. It wasn't that useful before I had the mic, and it just the interest just kind of grew from there. And then I went and studied at SAE, did a audio engineering diploma, and then very soon, well, a year after, but this is quite soon in relative terms. I had the opportunity to open a studio with the drummer of the band that I was playing in.
Wow, that is soon.
That was I was interning in another studio for a year, and our mutual friend Gordon Raphael, famous for producing "Is This It" by The Strokes, which is a pretty important album. Still, however many years on, I think it's 18 years on, still a record that gets mentioned all the time in recording sessions with people that I'm working with. They go, "Oh yeah, we'll try and get that stroke sound."
Wow.
He had set up a studio in London for a few years after making that record, and then he decided to move to Berlin. And his studio in London was essentially vacant, and that gave Matt and I an opportunity to get started with Gordon's help. And that's basically, that was 2007, and basically we've just been doing that ever since. It's grown, it's got more sophisticated, we've relocated. That studio wasn't where we are now,
right?
So that original studio was in Limehouse.
Okay.
And then in 2012 we took the decision to move out of that space and move into this one, which is entirely purpose built. Everything you see here, none of you can see this on the podcast. None of you listeners can see it, but it's all purpose built. We had a blank shell of a studio space, and we essentially kind of built our dream studio, which is where we are now.
Wow, yeah, it's gorgeous. It's such a beautiful place, and it's pretty gutsy move for both of you when you started, I guess. And
yeah, but I mean, it's and I was actually talking about this yesterday when I did a panel at BBC Introducing, I was saying it is opportunities present themselves, and something like that when someone goes, "There's this studio space which is available. Do you guys want to take it on?" People don't say that to people very often, so it was a real kind of, right, are we going to do this? The opportunity's there. There's time to take it. I mean, I wasn't expecting to open my own studio after I'd been interning for a year.
Yeah.
But it just kind of happened. And when these opportunities come up, you just got to grab them.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that seems to be a kind of similar theme from a few other people we spoke to. Things just come up when you don't really expect them. And if, I were to ask you 3 years before that happened, if that's where you thought you'd end up, it probably wouldn't be the case. So,
I kind of had, until we got the call, it was just like, oh, okay. Matt, I remember Matt walking in the room going, I've just spoken to Gordon. And he's like, do you want to open a studio? we discussed, it wasn't like we'd never thought of working together. We decided about 6 months previous to be a production team. So I was going to sort of engineer, he was going to produce, and that was going to be our setup. But we decided to do it, but we had no means to do it because we had no studio to work out of, no track record. So opening the studio was the means of establishing what we were doing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a little problem of no one knows who you are, and you've still got no track record, but at least you got a space to work in.
Yeah, no, incredible. So today, of course, as I mentioned before, we're talking about microphones. So usually what we do at the start of the episode is define the topic, whether it's mixing or mastering. But I mean, the general gist of what a microphone does, I think most people would understand.
Yeah, we're using them right now. You can hear us because there are microphones.
Yes, exactly. So that's a great definition, I think. Good place to start.
We won't use the word. Well, I will use the word transducer. It's a transducer, but that's just the science of it is irrelevant.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, obviously, there are a few different types of microphones, but if you were to define them under, a couple of the main categories that you'd use most often, what would they be?
So I would say that there are 3 main microphone types. Some people would say there's 2, but in terms of the way that I use mics, there's certainly 3. So you've got what we call dynamic microphone, you've got a condenser microphone, and you've got a ribbon microphone. That covers kind of 97% of microphone types. There are a couple of other mics that work in slightly different ways, but they're pretty kind of eccentric, and we'll just pretend that they don't exist for the purpose of this.
Yeah.
In terms of the way that you use them, they have certain properties which lend themselves to certain uses. So, starting with a dynamic microphone, that's kind of like that's just sort of workhorse. It's tough. It's like physically, it's a microphone that you can kind of pick up and put down and feasibly drop, or someone can hit it with a drumstick or something and it would probably survive.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of plug and play. You don't have to do anything in particular to get them working. You just plug the cable in. They're typically a cardioid pattern, which will skim past just for the minute. But your dynamic mic, it's a kind of heavy construction. It can deal with loud sounds quite well. The diaphragm of it, which is the part of the mic which actually kind of collects the signal, is physically quite heavy, which means it can deal with loud sounds, but it's also not perhaps as sensitive as the other types of microphone.
Yeah.
So a condenser microphone is the second category. That's the type of microphone we're actually using right now. So you can hear our voices through a condenser. They're a little bit more fragile, but that's because again, I mentioned the diaphragm. It's much lighter. And that makes it much more sensitive. And the key in terms of the use, the way that you use these microphones, Like I said, a dynamic mic, you just kind of plug it in and go.
Mm-hmm.
A condenser mic, you have to supply a voltage to it called phantom power.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing particularly complicated about that. It's just a button that you press.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go and buy a condenser microphone and you've never used one, you plug it in and you go, oh, it's not making any sound. It's because you haven't put the phantom power on. It's just a button that you press, basically, to turn it on. And then dynamic mics don't need phantom power. It's usually okay if it's on, but actually best practice is to only put the phantom power on condenser mics. And they, I mentioned polar patterns. They usually have a variety of polar patterns.
Yeah.
And then the third type is the ribbon mic, which is actually the oldest of the three microphone designs. So if you see kind of pictures of the BBC in the 50s, they have these big, chunky, you can't see my hands, but they're big. They're much bigger than the mics that we tend to see today.
Yeah.
Those are all ribbon mics. That was the kind of the dominant design in the 50s.
Yeah.
And they are much, much more delicate in construction. There's a tiny little metal ribbon in there.
I see.
And they're not actually as sensitive as, say, a condenser mic. But sonically, they've got kind of a much smoother property to them. So dynamic mics are kind of darker and tougher kind of sounding. Condensers are sort of kind of brighter, cleaner, crisper. And ribbon mics have a sort of a smoother sound to them. Right.
Okay, cool. And I know this probably depends on a lot of things and what kind of sound someone's trying to get from the recording. But would you say that because dynamic mics are so sturdy, they're more likely to be used in the live setting, and condenser mics, because they're a bit more fragile, are what you'd use typically in a studio setting?
You can use, certainly live, you tend to stick to dynamics. Because, the practicalities of they're going to be taken up and put down and people singing into them, perhaps bashing into them. They fall on, if it's a kind of noisy band or something. They can physically be beaten up quite a lot. But actually, I would say, personally, I used dynamic mics as much as I use condensers in the studio.
Okay.
But dynamic mics, they tend to work at their best on loud things. So drums, amplified guitars, brass, they're usually quite good on, something like brass. Whereas when you're coming to recording something a bit more delicate, say acoustic guitar or strings or something, a condenser mic is going to be much better for that kind of application because they've got more sensitivity. And they tend to be kind of more responsive to what we call dynamic range, which dynamic range is simply loudness and quietness and the difference between getting loud and getting quiet. But equally, I've probably recorded every combination of, I've recorded drums entirely with condenser mics. Entirely with dynamic mics. Usually use a combination of the two. And then strings, ribbon mics usually sound really nice on strings because they've got that smoothness to them. But sometimes they can feel a little bit flat. It just depends on the material, really.
I knew you were going to say
that. It depends. It all depends. There's no rules. No.
No, that's all right. I was expecting it. But no, that's helpful. So if someone was going shopping for a mic, for example, and, there are a few different things to consider, what would you say they are, or what would they need to think about?
Well, the first thing that you always consider whenever you're buying any piece of audio equipment is the price.
Yes, of course.
Because everyone's got their budget, and you can spend £50 on a mic, and it'd be pretty good. Or you can spend, I don't know what the most expensive mic is, but you could spend over £10,000 on a kind of rare vintage microphone or something. So there's a huge range. at the end of the day, they're all going to record something, and you will achieve the task of recording the thing that you're trying to record. If you're buying one mic, you want to think about its different applications, and actually, you want to think about what you're going to be recording with it. If it's just vocals, which is, to be honest, is usually if I get asked, well, what mic should I buy? That's usually the thing that the person's recording, and they go, yeah, I'm doing vocals, maybe a bit of something else. A condenser is usually the best choice for that, because it's got that sensitivity. Condensers usually sound good on vocals, unless you're kind of really yelling into it, in which case there's other dynamic mics that might be quite useful. So yeah, it depends. So there's if you're not doing vocals, which is kind of an unusual thing, because normally you're recording vocals at some point. A condenser mic, if you're recording electric guitar, one condenser mic is probably not the best. You're better off with a dynamic mic, because it's just a bit of a tougher thing. The other thing as well to consider is the polar patterns that come with the mic. Even if you are just doing vocals, different polar patterns will make things sound different. You're kind of your sort of bog standard polar pattern is what we call cardioid, and that means it sounds kind of obvious, but you point the mic at the thing, and it picks up what's in front of it, and it doesn't pick up what's behind it. So if I go around the back of this mic now, I disappear, and then I come back because this mic's on a cardioid pattern. So that's a useful thing, because it means that you can exclude other sounds in the room. But there's also there's two other main patterns. You can blend them. There's what we call a figure of 8, which is also directional, but as well as recording the thing that's directly in front of it, it will record what's directly behind it as well. Right. Which when I was at college, I thought, and sort of came across, I thought that sounds really annoying. You know, that's an annoying property. I don't want it to record the thing behind me. But there is ways that you can use that, because the directionality of it normally is actually more than a dynamic mic. So that's a good way to explain this. A dynamic mic it's pointed at the thing that it's pointed at, but it's also it's kind of like a widescreen thing. So it's, as well as picking up what's directly in front of it, it's going to be picking up things that are off to an angle. Everything about to kind of 100, would it be 90 degrees off what you're pointing at. So that means it will pick up things off to the side as well as what's in front of it. Whereas a figure of 8 actually is a lot more directional
front and
than
back.
That. Yeah, exactly. And although you've got that back pickup, the sides of it, for example, are really, really cut out. Exactly. Yeah. So you can use them particularly if you've got more than one sound source in a room. They're great for just kind of cutting the side.
Right. Yeah.
The sort of the spill from the sides off.
Yeah. So is it like the front and the back? Would it be equal almost?
They are equal.
Okay.
So you do have to think about where that back of the mic is pointing.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd mention about figure of 8 and also omnidirectional. So omnidirectional just means every direction.
Okay, so it's all around.
Yeah.
In like a spherical shape.
An absolutely spherical shape.
Right.
There is normally some sort of directionality to them,
Okay.
but it's in kind of practical terms, it's just picking up every direction.
Right.
Which in some circumstances is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
In other circumstances, say if you've got a drum kit and you put a room mic up, a room mic is just it's there to capture the sound of the room, so you put it away from the drum kit. An omni mic in that situation is quite fun because it's picking up a much more complete picture of the way the room sounds. But the interesting thing about these 3 patterns is that you can combine them. So a lot of mics have switches where you can kind of blend between them, and you get a bit of cardioid and a bit of figure of 8. But the other thing as well to mention is proximity effect. Sounds a bit like a jargon term, but what it essentially means is that when you get really close on the mic like that, it kind of, the sound gets more kind of bassy, and then when you get further away, it kind of thins out a little bit. That's what we call proximity effect,
right?
And you get that with the cardioid patterns, but you don't get it with omni and figure of 8,
right? Okay.
So you can use those things creatively, and that's the reason you quite often, when you're doing vocals, you'll use a cardioid pattern because it'll give you that kind of larger than life enhanced sound. But you don't always want that. Sometimes you want to record things in a more natural way, say like an acoustic guitar or something. I'll use figure of 8 probably a little bit more often than I would use cardioid, for example.
With a acoustic guitar?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of 50-50, because sometimes you want an acoustic guitar to have a bit of weight to it, and sometimes you purposefully don't. So you make these choices according to how you want things to sound.
Yeah, fair enough. So I feel like you've covered quite a bit of what I was going to ask in like one giant question, but that's all right. That's good. That's good. So we talked about 3 main types of mics.
Yeah.
So we had the dynamic, the condenser, and the ribbon mic.
That's great. Yeah.
And then we had 3 main polar patterns.
Yeah.
Which was the cardioid.
Yeah.
The figure of 8. And the omni, which is everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really nice kind of summary of the main aspects of mics, I guess. And when we're looking for what to buy, there's obviously the budget, there is the thing that you're trying to record and what you want to get out of it. And then the polar patterns as well. So, when I first went mic shopping, I didn't know anything about the polar patterns, but I did do what you said about like plugging it in, and then I was like, why is this not working? There's something wrong with this mic. Call like Audio Technica, that was my mic. Yeah. Then it's like
it happens to
power.
Everyone. It happens to me all the time. Sometimes I go, like, why is this not plugged in? Is the cable broken? I'm supposed audio professional.
Yeah,
it
happens.
Happens to everyone. You just
everyone.
miss the switch. It's nothing to be embarrassed about.
No, exactly. And like when we were plugging in today, and I was like, why is my mic not working? And it was just not plugged in. So it took me a second to work that out.
And that happens to me once a week. You know?
Yes, yeah. So it happens. Nothing to be ashamed of. And phantom power, for those who don't know, is like a switch in your audio interface. So you'll have like a little, like a button or like a knob or something that says like phantom power 48 plus
48.
volts.
You usually say 48V,
48V.
meaning 48 volts.
Yeah. So just make sure that's turned on, and then you should be fine from there. So
and I should do the obligatory health warning about phantom power and ribbon mics.
Oh.
Which is phantom power should not be applied to ribbon mics.
Okay.
Potentially destroy the ribbon mic.
Okay.
By applying phantom power.
Good to know.
So dynamic mics will, best practice is to turn it off, but they don't mind. But ribbon mics do mind.
Okay. Yeah.
So health
good
warning.
warning.
There
Good
for your
warning.
ribbon mics.
Yeah. Don't want to kill that. But another thing that you hear about quite often is noise floor. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
So noise floor in mic terms is it's the noise that the mic makes on its own. So it's the sound of the electronics.
Right.
I mean, it is something to think about, but to be honest, if you're buying new mics, they've usually got a really low noise floor. And by low noise floor, what that means is there is a hiss. Every piece of electronics generates some sort of hiss. Older stuff typically generates more of it. But it basically means if, say, we were to sit here in complete silence and we turn the gain on the mic up really loud, we'd start to hear some hiss. It's not normally a problem with condenser mics unless they're old or possibly maybe if there's something wrong with them. Dynamic mics, because you're usually using them with louder things, you're not normally adding a lot of gain gain means kind of amplification, essentially.
Yep.
You know, the loudness of the thing that you're recording will massively outweigh that kind of background hiss, that noise.
Mm-hmm.
With ribbon mics, particularly older ones, like one of my favourite mics is the Coles 4038, which is a vintage designed ribbon mic, because even the new ones, they still make them the way that they did in, I think it's the 50s they started making them. They do have a bit of hiss on them, bit of that noise floor.
Right.
So that can make it unsuitable for, I don't know, if I'm recording a delicate violin, that noise floor of the mic might start to get a bit annoying. But yeah, you kind of make creative choices about these things.
Yeah.
So sometimes a bit of hiss is actually quite nice.
Yeah.
Rather than having that complete
Nothing.
digital
Silence.
just cold landscape. And also when you start to listen out for it on your favorite records, not so much like kind of modern pop stuff, but even kind of like big records from the 80s have got quite a lot of kind of
Yeah. I feel like sometimes I just add that into my songs,
Yes.
because it adds some sort of warmth to it.
Yeah, exactly. It can make it feel you don't really want to be unsure whether your speakers are switched on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, true.
Which is what can happen sometimes.
Exactly. And you mentioned budget before, which obviously is something that we all need to think about.
Yeah.
Would you say if you're spending more, you're always getting a better mic?
This is the $64,000 question. Yes and no. Like, if you spend £1,000 on a mic, it's going to be a good mic. But that said, it doesn't necessarily mean it's better if you're using it for the wrong application. By wrong application, I don't mean there's a set of rules that you must abide by in order to make a great recording. Every different mic has a different tone to it. And I've got expensive mics and I've got cheaper mics. And the cheaper mics are not inferior. It's just they've got different characteristics. So condenser mics, for example, tend to be the most expensive ones because they kind of got this delicate finesse to them. And those are the ones you can easily spend thousands on.
Yeah.
But you don't need to spend a lot of money to get a great result. Sometimes if I'm working with a singer, you might try a few different mics on their voice. And you go, well, actually, you know what? This one here that cost about £200 or £300 or something. Sometimes that's better than the one that cost £2,000. So it's more about, yes, it's nice to have these lovely expensive things, but they're not always the best for the application. It's just kind of like voices in particular. Everyone's voice is different.
Yeah.
And most people's voices are different on different days, even. But the right mic for one singer is not the right mic for another singer. Yeah. And that's something that I'm constantly reminding people of.
Yeah. No, that's...
I have to remind myself as well. Sometimes I go like, oh, let's get the expensive one out. Let's get the U87 up because that's, that will make it sound more plush. Yeah. And then you hear the singer and you go, actually, that really doesn't, that's just not, it sounds a bit weird and thin. And then you get one of the cheaper ones out, or you try them on a dynamic and you go, well, the dynamic's just a bit more, particularly if someone's singing really loud or something, then sometimes like a dynamic might be better.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it's good summary of the budget thing. And like, so my first mic was a Audio-Technica 80-2020 and I still love it. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, I mean, these mics that we're using now are quite a bit more expensive than that one, but or a bit more expensive. And it's just something about that. I just love it on my voice. And
we've got an 4033 or a couple of those, which are very similar to the 2020. And they'll hold up next to a U87. They've got comparable sounds in terms of the way that they make things sound, but sometimes the Audio-Technica is a little softer. Yeah. And that sometimes matches up with people's voices better, and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, you know,
exactly. So all depends, guys.
It all depends.
Yep. So if you were, and I'm sure this is going to be a difficult question, but if you were to have one mic, like your favorite all-round mic,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Someone actually asked me this on a session
Oh, okay.
about 2 or 3 days ago.
So you had to think.
I've had to think about
Yeah.
this, but it didn't take me long to answer.
Okay.
It's the Shure SM7B.
Oh, right.
Or
Okay.
more commonly known as the SM7. The B
Yeah.
is, I think it's a minor variation.
Mm.
And the reason I would go with, and that's a dynamic mic, by the way.
Yeah. It's quite popular for podcasting, isn't it?
It's a lovely mic to talk into.
Yeah.
It's a lovely mic to sing into. Get a bit harsh sometimes with certain singers, but most of the time when you put an SM7 up in front of someone, you go, that sounds pretty decent. yeah, nice. It's the versatility of it. There's not many things that I feel like I couldn't record well. You can use it sounds great on snare, sounds great on a guitar amp, sounds great even as a kick drum mic. It's maybe not the best, but you go, okay, well, I can get away with that. That'll work well. Brass, loads and loads and loads and loads of things. And, it wouldn't be my first choice for something like strings or like a drum overhead or an acoustic guitar, but it would work. You'd still get a decent result from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. No, that's good. So I think we've covered like most of the questions that we had about mics, but before I go on to some of our questions from the audience, what would you say your favorite aspect of your job is?
It changes day to day, but I think overall it's the people. Actually, it's to work with so many different people. And musicians generally on the whole are lovely. It's just get up in the morning and I go to the studio and, I might be working a really long day. I might be doing like a 12-hour day or more or something, which that can be quite tiring, but I'm spending my time with lovely people most of the time.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
And as a part of that as well, you're helping them realize, their art. Without sounding too sort of airy-fairy. You're helping someone create something that they want to create. You're kind of enabling them. You're going on this little part of their journey as well. There's a trust, they trust you with their music. So you kind of share in the thing that they've created for a little while. So it's that really.
Yeah. Lovely.
Obviously, I love playing around with plugins and mics and things. That's great fun as well. But it's actually the people.
Yeah.
The main thing.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. No, that's good. And the most challenging part of your job.
The people. No. Challenging people.
I'm sure that happens as well, but
I think it does relate to it. Like sometimes I find this is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's a career, it's a vocation, but it is a lifestyle as well, because when you're working long hours, you can end up a little bit kind of cut off from the world, lacking a bit of sleep. That can be a difficult thing to kind of just make sure you're taking care of yourself. And not just kind of getting overworked and you get more tired and then you get more stressed more easily. That can be tough at times when you've got a really busy schedule. It's just kind of making sure that you're kind of staying healthy, staying motivated.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's so different from other jobs, where you have a set time and then you go home at a certain time and then hopefully not really think about it. But when it's something that you love doing so much, then you can just work forever and then not realize
exactly
it.
Yeah, I mean, in running my own studio, I set the hours, which is normal. I normally work 10 till 8, and Matt does as well. Matt's the other guy who works here, and that's actually that's still a 10-hour day. That's still, if you even work 5 days, that's still 50 hours. That's still quite a lot. More than a lot of people work. But if you haven't got the best out of the day in 10 hours, staying another 4 till 2 in the morning, it usually doesn't. Sometimes it's necessary if there's a deadline to meet, but you're not usually at your best after that kind of time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think some timelines and deadlines are good to kind of keep you on track.
A bit of structure.
Yeah, exactly. But so we've got a couple of questions from a few people around the world. So we've got one from Robin Lovecchio from LA. So
Hello, Robin.
So Robin asks, do you usually pair a mic to a voice, or are there other things to consider? So you touched on this a little bit earlier.
I've usually got a hunch about, if I haven't worked with a singer before, I'll usually just have a kind of instinctive hunch where I go, well, I think this mic's gonna be the right thing.
Okay.
But that call that I make is correct as often as it is incorrect, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Because actually, you never know until you hear someone singing through the mic whether it's a really good match or something. And sometimes you don't have time. Sometimes you just got to kind of get the mic up and off you go, and no time to lose.
Yeah.
But if there is time to try a few different mics, even choosing ones that you think will be wrong, just to confirm that they're wrong.
Yeah.
That's a very worthwhile thing, because sometimes you're completely surprised. You go, I thought that one was going to sound awful, but actually it's really
perfect.
It's really good.
Yeah.
The other things to consider are, I did mention this earlier, but polar patterns. Normally you record vocals with a cardioid pattern, but you don't have to. If a singer is kind of sounding a bit overly bassy or something, switch the pattern. Try a different pattern. You do need to be recording them in a room that sounds good, like a vocal booth or something, or at least a space that sounds pleasant.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you do take off the cardioid and you switch to or obviously an omni,
you're getting everything.
You're going to pick up everything in the room. An omni mic in the right circumstances is amazing with a singer, but yeah, it's just the practicalities of it can be a bit of a pain.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But and the other thing to think about is very simple. It's just distance from the microphone. It was something that for the first couple of years of engineering and producing, I wasn't really thinking about it. But sometimes you can actually do quite a lot of kind of EQing of the sound just with the distance from the mic.
Right.
There's generally a bit of a distance from the mic that sounds good.
Yeah.
But you can kind of play around with it a little bit.
Yeah, well, this was actually a question of mine, which I've forgotten to ask, but is there like a general rule of thumb when you're recording vocals of the distance that usually works, or is it what you want to achieve?
I mean, there's normally a pop shield involved when you're recording any kind of speech, and a pop shield is there. It's that weird circular disc, which I can see two of right now. It's got kind of this material stretched over it, which is a bit like sort of tights.
I made my first pop shield, which was because I had like a sewing thing. If anyone sews, I'm an old person really at heart, so I sew and knit and stuff all the time. But it's like a sewing thing, and I'd put like 2 pairs of stockings above it, and I just like held it in front of my mic, which
it works
fine.
It works as well as the best pop shields.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, anyway, the purpose of that is to stop the P's and the B's, because those sounds create a literal gust of wind, and if that hits the mic diaphragm, you get kind of boomy noises and unpleasant things that you don't want. So in terms of the actual distance from the mic, with a condenser, you want to be about the distance you are now. So that's what's that? It's about 20 centimeters, something like that. That's usually a good starting point. And you also want to make sure that the singer hasn't got their face kind of touching the pop shield. You actually need the pop shield to be a few centimeters back or inches for these North Americans, because actually you can defeat the pop shield if you're right on top of it. And those are kind of best practice things to watch out for.
Okay, and some people say like for the mic to be kind of lower than your mouth, or some people say a bit higher, and there's so many different things.
Sometimes it can make a difference. It's not usually the first thing on my mind. There is a theory that if the mic is kind of pointing at a slightly downward angle, then when the singer's mouth is open, their tongue is visible to the mic.
Okay.
And that's obviously softer than if the mic's pointing upwards, you're getting the roof of the mouth,
right?
Which is a sort of more reflective
surface.
That's the theory.
I see.
I've personally never found that
makes a massive difference. But...
Yeah, and the problem with that kind of thing, again, this is very much an opinion thing, but the more you load the singer with things to remember, the more they're thinking about other things in their performance.
That's true. That's very true.
If a singer's really concerned about those things and is like, I insist on getting these things right, then yeah, you explain them to them. But psychologically, and there's so much about what goes on in the studio that is psychology.
Yeah.
And that can come down to expensive microphones as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes a singer will sing better into a more expensive microphone because they know it's a more expensive microphone. And they just get fired up. They're like, yeah, that's expensive gear. You can experiment with things like distance of the mic and angles and things, but the most important thing as a singer is just to be relaxed.
Yeah,
and thinking about your performance.
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. And some of my favorite recordings I've just got with me like sitting in bed just because I'm totally relaxed. And even though like I'm not thinking about all these other things and it's not on a proper stand and stuff. So, and I was talking to Olga about this during another podcast and she was like, it's the performance, it's the most important thing. And all the other things are just tiny tweaks.
Yeah. Sometimes, again, just going back to the SM7, another useful thing about it is it does have an internal shock mount to it. So you can hold it in your hand.
Okay, yeah.
And I've done that. I've had people kind of walking around the whole studio just kind of singing their vocals.
Cool.
That's not best practice.
Yeah.
Because they're, in inverted commas, too close to the mic when they're doing that. But that's sometimes beside the point.
Yeah, exactly. So the next question we had from Ryan KP from Melbourne. So he asked, what is your favorite method to record acoustic guitars? And what do you think of the MS technique? Now, I don't know what that is. So we'll just explain that quickly.
So the MS technique. Oh gosh, that's quite a hard one to explain. So MS is when you have two mics.
Yeah.
You put one on cardioid and you point it directly at the thing you're recording.
Yeah.
And then you put a second mic kind of over the top or as close to the same position as possible. And then the one that you put above, you put on figure of 8 and you put it at 90 degrees. So the blind side of that figure of 8 pattern is pointed at the source. And that's your M and S, your mid and side.
Yeah. So one is pointed directly to, and then the other one is kind of the side of it, which you wouldn't technically pick up in your or not much of it through your figure of 8.
Yeah, so it's kind of the side aspect of it is what's happening. It's kind of like the ambience, I guess.
Or I guess, what is your favorite way to record
acoustic guitar?
Guitars?
Sticking a mic in front of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Nice and easy.
Yeah. But I mean, again, it depends. I don't record acoustic guitar in stereo that much.
Right. Okay.
But that's to do with the types of material that I'm typically recording.
Yeah.
I don't record very many songs where the acoustic guitar is the main element.
Yeah.
And I find that say I've got a kind of like a rock band and they do an acoustic guitar overdub to add some kind of a bit of spice or a bit of vibe. I normally find that recording it in stereo is a bit irritating once I come to mix it, and I go, oh, maybe I'll just drop this.
Yeah.
Because whenever you set up more than one mic, you've got to get them working together.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can take some time. And if you don't do it right, you can quite often get a worse sound with two mics than you can with one. Like more mics is not better,
always better,
because the way that the mics combine. I'm not sure if you really want to get into this, but it is. It's an important point actually. When you've got different mics at different distances from a sound source, the sound arrives at those mics at different times. But when you combine them in your DAW, you play them back at the same time. And you get, I'm not going to go into what things like comb filtering are necessarily, but it can make it sound bad.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
So whenever you're putting more than one mic on something, you want to make sure that your mics are either the same distance from the source, or I think you kind of call it the rule of 3 or something. You make sure that your mics are very different distances apart from the source. So if you've got something that's 3 inches from the guitar, your second mic probably wants to be at least 9 inches away.
Yeah.
Or centimeters.
Yeah, that's good. And then our last question was from Rona Castriotti from London. So she asked 2 types of mic setups, but she mentioned the Eddie Kramer or the Glyn Johns drum miking technique. But let's just go with, because I think we're going to go a bit too long if we explain what those are. But what is your favorite way to mic up drums?
Well, my favourite way is the Glyn Johns way, actually.
Okay. Oh, great. Good.
So that's
Good.
So that's handy. Yeah. Again, going into what those actual mic setups are, trying to explain that only on a podcast is going to be a bit futile. You can look them up online and see a picture.
Yeah.
And that will explain what those things are. But yeah, the Glyn Johns technique is awesome.
Yeah. Cool.
It's kind of a variation of what we call AB or space pair. But yeah, it's Glyn Johns usually with Coles, which I don't think is necessarily strict in the strictest sense the actual Glyn Johns method.
Is that a mic? Coles.
So Coles, sorry, yeah, the Coles 4038 is the ribbon, the ribbon mics that I mentioned earlier, which are built the same way as they were in the 50s. So they're sometimes called the BBC mics.
Right. Okay. Okay, cool. So the Glyn Johns method has one, and we can look that up.
Yeah. It's
exactly how that's mic'd.
It's also the technique that takes a long time to master.
Oh, okay, cool.
So not. I wouldn't recommend starting with that as your kind of drum miking. It takes practice to get that one right.
Okay. And the most simple, like really quickly, simple setup for drums?
Just one
mic.
Well, maybe 2. One thing that I like to remind people of is people do record drums in stereo a lot, but you don't have to. Like, it was all right for the Beatles recorded all their drums in mono, and they did all right.
Yeah,
you know?
I reckon.
So yeah, I guess you stick one mic above the kit, kind of just right over the top, and then that will usually give you a pretty decent sound. And then perhaps one mic on the bass drum, because you're not gonna, if you've got a mic right over the kit, you're gonna get a lot of cymbals. You're not gonna get a lot of the bottom end from the kick drum. And then one on the snare. 3. I mean, I could get a decent drum sound with 3 mics. Again, takes a bit of practice. But it's all about where you place the mics.
Yeah. Cool. All right, cool. I think we've covered quite a lot there, and but I think that's really helpful and a good starting point for someone, I think, that isn't sure really where to get started on mics. So thank you so much, Dan.
No,
it's
my
been
pleasure.
an absolute pleasure, and thank you again, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me.